Hi, this is George Whittam reporting for Whittam's World. This week's topic is something that I kind of avoid debating or even discussing because there are so many opinions, it's very personal, and people who are into the technology of recording will argue to their dying day that this topic really matters. Is it worth investing in a high-end preamp? The question came in from Jim McCabe. He said, let's talk about low-end versus high-end preamps. My current signal chain is a Shure KSM44A microphone into a Focusrite 2i2, resulting in a noise floor around minus 62 dB. I recently bought and returned an Audient ID22 because tonally it sounded very similar to the 2i2, and while the Audient was quieter, it only saved me about 3 dB. Not worth the $700 price tag versus the $150 for the 2i2. I've long lusted after the Avalon M5, but what does the nearly $1,700 get me? Is the signal it produces so much better that I can plug in a 416 with a self noise of 24 dB A-weighted, I'll explain that in a minute, versus the 44A's 48 dB A-weighted, and still have a comparable noise floor? Boiled down, is the signal coming out of the M5 20 dBA hotter than a 2i2? This is a really good example, and I'm going to use this episode and repost it over and over every time these debates come up about mic preamps and whether you should buy external preamps, because my honest feeling is that recording a voiceover, a single voice in a controlled environment with a good quality microphone is pretty easy to do. Meaning that the human voice is not extremely complicated, is nowhere near as complicated as an instrument such as a guitar or certainly a piano. And because of that, we're not really concerned about preamps that have a lot of extremely high-end componentry to capture the voice. Higher end mic preamps give you extremely long life in regards to the components that are used. They use the best quality components. The Avalon M5 is certainly no exception. They use an extremely high current and very heavy and well-built power supply, which is what supplies the electricity to power the preamp. And a lot of audio geeks will argue that's one of the most important parts. But the difference you're going to get really comes down to the character of the mic preamp itself. As you've seen with a 416, which already has a self noise of 24 dBA, mics can have much lower self noises. But what really matters is how does it work in the real world in a home studio. And in those situations, because the 416 rejects so much background noise, it generally sounds quieter or has less noise than most other microphones in a home studio. So that said, comparing these two mics in a controlled room, unless that controlled environment of your studio has itself a noise floor that is quiet enough to expose the difference in the self noise of those two mics, you're never going to hear the difference. And you'd have to have an extremely quiet studio, probably less than 75 dB noise floor, or minus 75 dB noise floor, to really maybe even hear the difference in noise, self noise of these two mics. So whatever noise that's imparted on the signal by the mic preamp itself is very likely going to be much lower, even still, than what those microphones are generating. So when it comes to finding low noise mic preamps, we've already been able to do that with very inexpensive circuitry. And that's basically what's contained in a Focusrite 2i2. I don't know exactly who makes the chip. I could certainly look it up and see what manufacturer or what design they're using for AD converter, whether it's a Burr Brown or Cirrus Logic and all this stuff. You can look up and see. But as you've demonstrated, the comparison of the Scarlett 2i2, which is an affordable entry-level audio interface, with a much higher quality much more expensive audio interface like the Audient ID22, you're going to find the difference is going to be almost completely indistinguishable. The differences are really going to come down to features such as the Audient's more complex audio routing capabilities, the control surface, or the the interface itself, the buttons, the functions and features on the ID22, and just the really high-end circuitry that is in that unit, which could yield better results in more difficult situations, such as recording instruments, pianos, things like that. Those are situations where the differences in quality between these devices might start to really become obvious. Don't worry too much about it. I mean, it's a good experiment to try these things, but you're really not going to hear any dramatic difference using a mic preamp as high-end as an M5 in pretty much any home studio environment. If you're really looking for something different, some kind of character out of your mic preamp, there are some mic preamps that do color the sound more than the M5 will, and really will change some of the character of the microphone and add something to it that wasn't normally there. Some distortion, some grit, some warmth, things like that. Preamps that are modeled after the old vintage Neve preamp design, such as the Gap 73, and then preamps such as the Warm WA12, which I've mentioned in the past. These are affordable mic preamps that, if you really want to add color and a little bit of flavor or distortion to the audio, will do that quite well for a very affordable price. So, experiment with it, but really our job is to capture the microphone with accuracy and total accuracy and cleanliness so that the producer can add their special sauce to the audio. If you're producing and your job is to come up with the final product, the path you choose to take is totally up to you, and that's what makes you a producer. You're someone that knows how to use your tools, hears and knows the differences between all these different pieces of gear. But as the job of a voice actor, whose job it is to capture their own microphone accurately and cleanly, these extra bells and whistles or these extra higher end circuits are these days going to make there's such a tiny difference. The law of diminishing returns is so severe. It's sort of like the world of audiophile, equipment, where you can spend $200 on some really great sounding speakers, $2,000 on speakers that sound a little bit better, or $20,000 on speakers that sound a little bit better than those, $200,000 on speakers that sound a little bit better than those. You get the idea. As my motto always says, if it sounds good, it is good. Oh, one last thing. His very last statement, Jim says, is the signal coming out of the M5 20 dB hotter than a 2i2? Well, in that case, I think you're probably referring to, does it have 20 decibels more gain? And it very well may. In fact, I believe the 2i2 has about the capability of gaining up or adding about 50 decibels of gain, whereas the Avalon can add up to about 70 decibels. I'll put the actual values down below so you can read up about what the differences are in the amount of gain. But yes, the M5 is probably capable of adding more gain to the signal. So if you're using a microphone that's not very sensitive, such as a ribbon or dynamic mic, you might have better results using a standalone preamp like the M5 for a mic that needs a lot more gain. But with a 416 or the KSM44A, not an issue. Oh, and PSPS, that little A after the decibels, that means A weighted. You can measure a volume in what's called A weighting or C weighting. C weighting more closely mimics the way we hear as humans, and A is more accurate on an instrumentation level. So thanks for watching. This has been another episode of Whittam's World. If you'd like to have one of your questions answered on a future Whittam's World, I'd love to have it. Just send it in to whittamsworld@edgestudio.com, and I'd be glad to answer it on a future episode. And if you really could use more one-on-one or on-demand support, if you have something more urgent or you really like to get audio processing set up for you, or learn how to design the acoustics in your room, or do studio design in regards to signal path, mixer setup, things like that, vostudiotech.com is still the place to set that up. Thanks again for watching. This is George Whittam from Whittam's World. I'll see you guys next time.